Howdy, and welcome to this episode of Human Geography According to Mr. Gresham. Today we're going to talk about the demographic transition model. I'm sure you've seen this image of the stages of life before as human beings advance from infant into the final stages of adulthood as the elderly. Well, nations have a habit, or populations have a habit, of also going through these stages. And instead of calling them the stages of life, we call them the demographic transition model. So I'm going to do my best to explain this to you today. Stage one is a low growth stage. In this stage, and this is a pre-industrial stage, death rates and birth rates are very high and roughly in balance. So you're having lots of children. Families have lots of children, but most of them do not survive to adulthood. So families have to have lots of kids if they want to have any chance of having adult children to later take care of them or aid them on the farm, because this is definitely agricultural societies at this point. And this is really going to stay this way. You're not going to see any societies advance out of stage one until you get into the late 18th century, which is the early 1700s, when you'll see this balance ended in Europe. And it'll be ended by the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution in Europe allowed us to see for the first time populations advance into stage two, which is going to be a very high growth stage because they can now feed the children, and nutrition is good enough that children are surviving to adulthood at much higher rates. But culturally, families are still having very large families. So a family of two adults might produce far more than two children. So they're not just replacing themselves. You're going to see massive population increases during this time. And the reason why is, as technology increases food supply, it's also changing the way we live in cities and other ways. So what you're seeing is sanitation's improving, medicine's improving, the food supply is improving, due in large part to things like selective breeding of animals and crop rotation, which allows fields to produce higher yields. Also, because of the Columbian Exchange, you're starting to see higher nutrition foodstuffs that had previously been unavailable in Europe available to the large populations of Europe. And so you're going to see, especially in Europe, cultures begin to advance into this stage two of demographic transition, which is high growth, but the death rate's decreasing. So because of this, you see an upward spike in population. Stage 3, or the moderate growth stage, is when the birth rates begin to fall due to the use of contraception, increases in wages, and urbanization, and a reduction in subsistence agriculture. As people move to the cities, you begin to see the emergence of what's called a commercial society, where people go to work and they earn money, and they then take that money and they buy what they need. And so the more money a family is bringing in, the more wealth they can have. And with this, you begin to see children begin moving out of the workplace. As children move out of the workplace, child survival rates go up, but also children are no longer wage earners. So families begin to see children less as a work assistance program and more of as a financial liability. So fewer children are going to be born as children become more expensive to educate. Also, women will begin to go into the workforce, and as women go into the workforce, child rates drop also. And this isn't just necessarily through new uses of contraception, but as education rates go up for women, women begin to see the benefits of having fewer children, especially when the children you have will survive to adulthood in all likelihood. So population growth will begin to level off in this stage 3 of moderate growth. And you'll begin to see birth rates declining in developed nations, starting in the late 19th century, which is the 1800s. In Europe, though, in other parts of the world, some nations haven't even moved out of stage 1 yet. Most are roughly in stage 2. Demographic transition stage 4. This is low growth. This is what was thought for a long time to be the final stage of the demographic transition model. Here, birth rates and death rates are low. Birth rates may actually drop well below replacement level, and you have seen this happen in several countries, Germany, Italy, and Japan, are among the examples here. And so as people begin to live longer and longer and longer lives, living, on average into the late 70s, early 80s, and some people living even past 100, you see several generations of a family living all at the same time. And so population is aging. You're fewer people. There's fewer young people and much more old people. And so this begins to see the beginnings of a negative growth rate, which of course takes us into demographic transition stage 5, which doesn't exist in some people say there is no stage 5, some people say there is a stage 5. I'll let you decide for yourself, but this one's called negative growth. And you're already seeing this in countries such as Sweden, where they're moving into a negative growth rate, meaning there are less births than deaths. So the country's population is actually decreasing. And that's significant when you think about the fact that you might have as many as 5 generations of a family living at the same time, from children, grandchildren, all the way up to great-grandparents, all living at the same time. And for there to be a negative population growth, that means there are significantly fewer children being born. This is due usually to the increased emancipation and financial independence of women, as well as single-gender relationships, which tend to not produce children. Also, many families are just choosing to not have children at all, as this, incredibly wonderful-looking couple over here where their dog is their child, the world's best dad, and he's got his dog on a sweater. And I'm thinking they probably shouldn't have children, because if that picture got out when someone was a teenager, they would just die that anyone had known their parents had ever worn those red reindeer thingies on their head. So this is due in large part due to children becoming such a financial burden. Kids are expensive. I hate to tell you this, guys, but if you were to ask your parents and they were to answer truthfully, they would have a lot more money to spend on themselves if you weren't around. And so a lot of people are choosing to be selfish and not have children so they can keep all the toys to themselves. And this is causing, in some nations, to be a serious problem, as they're not having enough people to do the work. Japan is a great example of this. Japan is very top-heavy when it comes to aging population. So let's see what this model looks like when you put it down on paper. This is the model graphed out, and you have the 5 stages on the graph here. You have stage 1, where you have death rate and birth rate. This line here is birth rate, and this line here is death rate. You'll notice they're very high, but they're very close together. But look, population is very low. So you're having to work like crazy to keep population rate up with death rate. Then you begin to see technology starting to play, and birth rate stays high in stage 2, but notice death rate's going down, nutrition is improving, medicine is improving, and so you see death rate decreasing rapidly, but birth rate maintains at a high level. Culturally, they still place a high emphasis on large families, and this would have been the 1700s in Europe, but you can see this today in some nations that are just moving out of stage 1 and into stage 2. For example, many nations in South America, Central America, Africa, and Asia, they still have incredibly high birth rates, even though technology is allowing all the children to survive. That's why you have such massive population explosions in countries, say, for example, Bangladesh. Then you move into 3, where you're starting to see birth rates drop. As education, especially for women, starts to increase, birth rates drop. And so you begin to see the line starting to move closer together. Death rate is now evening out as you get to the end of stage 3, and birth rates are starting to drop, and they're starting to close that gap. Then you move into 4, and you see birth rates merge with death rates by the time you get to stage 4. And then in stage 5, you hit declining, where birth rates actually drop below death rates, and so you begin to see this decreasing population. And the United States today would be somewhere towards the end of 4. Examples of 5 would be Germany and some other countries in Europe like that, Italy, and I believe Sweden. So that is the demographics model, or demographics transition model. I hope this helped explain it and made it a little bit clear for you. Thank you for your time.